Quebec City has canceled the show of American musician Sean Feucht. The singer is a prominent figure in the MAGA movement, which has created problems on his North American tour.
In late July 2025, multiple Canadian cities quietly made the same decision, and it sent a loud message. Quebec City, Charlottetown, Moncton, and Halifax all revoked performance permits for Sean Feucht, a musician and vocal MAGA supporter. The stated reason was public safety. Local authorities cited security concerns after hearing from residents and community groups. Feucht was scheduled to perform at Expo Cité in Quebec City on July 25th. But the venue, owned by the city, canceled the show after learning of the artist's political ties. He's closely aligned with Donald Trump's inner circle and has publicly opposed abortion and LGBTQ+ rights. No riots, no shouting matches. Just a quiet decision made through administrative process backed by strong local sentiment.
Elected politicians.
Elbows up!
It's elbows up time. We will never kiss the gangster's ring.
This wasn't the result of a nationwide campaign or a coordinated protest. It wasn't even officially tied to the Elbows Up movement. But for those watching closely, the fingerprints were unmistakable. Elbows Up emerged earlier this year as Canada's signature cultural response to Donald Trump's aggressive trade tactics and political rhetoric. It's not about confrontation. It's about silent resistance. Not slamming fists on the table, but raising an elbow. Firm, unshaken, and unmistakably clear. The cancellation of Feucht's concerts didn't cite this movement, yet the tone matched perfectly. No need to chant. No need to clash. Just quietly say, "Not here."
Feucht is closely aligned with Trump allies. The news comes after mounting pressure from opposition parties in Quebec City and community groups who promised to protest outside the venue.
To understand why this reaction resonates, you have to look at the broader context. Since his return to the White House, President Trump has reintroduced steep tariffs, 25% on most Canadian goods, and even floated the idea of Canada becoming America's 51st state. These statements, layered with trade threats and economic pressure, sparked a cultural backlash north of the border. Canadians didn't respond with boycotts or political stunts. They responded through everyday choices, refusing to host, refusing to platform, refusing to bend. In that sense, Sean Feucht's tour became a mirror, not just of American conservatism, but of how Canada chooses to draw its own lines. Importantly, this wasn't cancel culture in the American sense. There were no mass social media campaigns, no national bans. Each decision was local and procedural. City officials acted within their rights. Parks Canada in Halifax, for example, withdrew event permits due to safety assessments, not ideology. This wasn't about silencing religious voices. It was about maintaining public trust and safety in shared spaces. The same communities that celebrate Pride also chose not to endorse what they saw as a politicized form of worship. Today, Elbows Up is no longer trending online, but its ethos continues to shape Canada's cultural identity. When Trump imposes tariffs, Canada doesn't shout. It invests in domestic resilience. When MAGA-linked performers arrive, Canadians don't clash. They quietly close the door. Prime Minister Mark Carney hasn't made bold statements about this incident. He doesn't need to. The response is already written. In the canceled contracts, the calm city statements, and the collective understanding that some messages just don't belong. This quiet resistance works. It takes the stage away from MAGA, not by shouting, but by saying nothing at all. As more Canadians turn to local music, art, and media, they're creating their own culture, one that doesn't need approval from Washington. It's not cancel culture, it's Canada choosing its own voice. While Trump governs through pressure, Canada responds with posture. And in this case, all it took was a few canceled concerts to remind the world, not all resistance is loud. Sometimes it's just an elbow, raised firmly, held steadily, saying everything without a single word.
Consumer boycotts are the reason that President Trump and some of his team have referred to Canada as being mean and nasty to deal with.
Ontario's premier says Canada needs to match President Donald Trump's tariffs dollar for dollar.
Donald Trump doesn't usually hold back, But this time, his words triggered something deeper than political drama. Standing before a crowd of business leaders in Washington, his hand-picked ambassador to Canada explained why Trump sees Canadians as mean and nasty to deal with. Not because of military threats or major trade violations, but because Canadians are quietly boycotting U.S. travel and refusing to buy American alcohol. On the surface, it sounded like a throwaway insult, but what it revealed was something far more telling: that the Canadian public's grassroots reaction, one without protests or megaphones, was working. It began with tariffs. Steel, lumber, aluminum, sectors deeply tied to Canadian jobs were suddenly slapped with high U.S. duties in early 2025. Then came the rhetoric. Trump's remarks about Canada taking advantage of America sparked anger and confusion. Instead of shouting back, Canadians changed their habits. By July 2025, according to data from international travel platforms like Hopper and Expedia, flights from Canada to the US dropped by over 26%. Alberta and British Columbia led the decline. Meanwhile, Canadian liquor boards from Ontario to Quebec reported a dramatic drop in American alcohol sales. In some cases, shelves were restocked entirely with domestic or European brands. At the same time, retail movements like Buy Canadian surged. Independent shops across Ottawa, Montreal, and Vancouver said their sales of Canadian-made goods had doubled compared to the same period last year. What started as a reaction became a movement, and it got Washington's attention.
Like, obviously, Canadians are outraged. I say Canadians, stick with it, like, hold the line.
BC Premier David Eby says Hoekstra's remarks show Canada's efforts to stand up to Trump are, quote, having an impact.
If Trump thought provinces would buckle under pressure, he misread the room. British Columbia Premier David Eby publicly challenged the tone coming out of Washington. He didn't just defend the boycott, he said it was proof that Canadians were finally being heard. In Ontario, Premier Doug Ford took a different but equally firm approach. Instead of backing down, he called on Ottawa to respond with equal tariffs, dollar for dollar. In his words, showing weakness would only invite more pressure. Across the political spectrum, premiers aligned on one message: Canadians have the right to protect their economy and sovereignty, even if that means spending differently.
We should note.
To our friends and neighbors in Canada, the Granite State sends you our greetings and says we miss you.
The ambassador's comments may have sparked outrage, but not everyone in the U.S. echoed that tone. Just days later, a bipartisan group of U.S. senators visited Ottawa. Unlike the ambassador, they didn't criticize Canadians. They expressed concern. New Hampshire's Maggie Hassan and Nevada's Catherine Cortez Masto noted how their states were already feeling the pain. Canadian tourism was down, shopping districts were quieter, and hospitality jobs were at risk. In Nevada alone, Canadians usually account for 30% of international visitors. That number has sharply declined this summer, and with it, millions in revenue. What Canadians chose to do with their vacation dollars was no longer a small matter. It was reshaping cross-border economics.
Many in Ottawa say Trump's rhetoric just strengthens their resolve to buy Canadian and boycott travel down south.
Some might say skipping a trip or switching a brand is too small to matter. But collectively, these choices created pressure, the kind that even Trump's administration couldn't ignore. This wasn't about emotion, it was about agency. Canadians didn't need to shout, their wallets spoke for them. And if those choices made them seem mean and nasty, then perhaps that label was never really an insult, but a sign of strength.
I think Trump is Trump, and we listen to him, and then we just let one thing, what he says, go through one ear and out the other.
In the end, this moment isn't about diplomatic language, it's about posture. Trump may dominate headlines, but Canada, quietly and collectively, is demonstrating resolve. Not through threats, not through deals, but through everyday decisions made by people, provinces, and premiers to stand their ground, protect what's theirs, and define what kind of neighbor they choose to be. Because if mean and nasty means refusing to bow under pressure, then Canada is wearing it well.
Canada's new government will do several things. First, we will take a series of measures to stabilize our domestic steel market and prevent harmful trade diversion arising from current trade tensions.
When President Trump raised tariffs to 50% on Canadian steel in early June, the blow was immediate. Within days, exports collapsed, jobs were cut, and one of Canada's most tightly integrated cross-border industries found itself severed from its biggest customer. This week, Prime Minister Mark Carney finally responded, not with threats or retaliation, but with something more calculated, a structural shift. One designed not just to react, but to rebuild.
The trade actions of the United States are further transforming global steel market dynamics and supply chain. Let's be clear. Canada will be one of the countries most impacted by these developments.
The plan starts with a clear message. Canada will no longer be the world's most open steel market. For decades, nearly 2/3 of Canada's steel consumption has come from imports, while over 90% of its steel exports flowed south to the United States. Now, that equation is being rewritten. By the end of this month, Canada will implement strict tariff rate quotas. For countries without a free trade agreement, imports will be capped at 50% of their 2024 volumes. Anything above that will face a 50% tariff. For FTA partners, the cap is 100%, with the same 50% penalty beyond the threshold. A second, more targeted measure aims directly at Chinese origin steel. Any product containing steel melted and poured in China, regardless of where it's finished, will face additional tariffs. With one exception, U.S. steel remains untouched under existing CUSMA terms. This isn't retaliation, it's insulation.
So moving forward, we must diversify our trade relationships. And above all, we must rely more on Canadian steel for Canadian projects.
Rather than escalate tensions, Carney is using this moment to reorient the domestic market. That means investing, not just protecting. The federal government will inject $1 billion through the Strategic Innovation Fund. This money is earmarked for Canadian steel producers to modernize equipment, produce higher-value products, and fill the gaps left by lost U.S. contracts. To support workers directly, $70 million will be funneled through labor market development agreements, covering training and income assistance for up to 10,000 steel employees. An additional $150 million in regional support will be prioritized for steel-producing communities, alongside expanded loan access for mid-sized firms, lowering entry requirements, cutting interest rates, and extending loan terms from 5 to 7 years. But perhaps the most transformative change is in federal procurement. Going forward, government contractors will be required to use Canadian steel in major infrastructure, housing, and defense projects. From shipyards to bridges, the steel that builds Canada will now come from within. All of this unfolds in the shadow of Trump's tariff threats. Canada's position is precarious. A 35% blanket tariff on all Canadian goods is scheduled to begin August 1st, unless a bilateral deal is reached first. And yet, Ottawa has not retaliated. Instead, it's holding the door open, keeping tariffs off U.S. steel for now, while maintaining strategic leverage elsewhere. Digital services taxes have been paused. Canada has engaged in fentanyl coordination. Every move is part of a broader strategy to stay at the table, without appearing weak. Though the Prime Minister has acknowledged that no country has secured a deal with the U.S. free of tariffs under this administration, his approach suggests a pivot. The focus now is not on removing tariffs entirely, but shaping where and how they apply. The likely target is a reduced selective rate, 8% to 10% instead of 35%, with carve-outs for essential sectors like autos, energy, and metals.
Say we will continue to do business with the U.S. That's of the year, but we will also work with new partners or partners that we have not developed commercial relationship as deep as the U.S. one, including, of course, with Europe and key Asian countries.
Canada isn't just responding to a crisis. It's laying the foundation for a more self-reliant economy, one where steel is not just exported, but embedded in national development. This shift won't bring back every job. It won't reverse every lost shipment. But it offers breathing room and a pathway forward. Whether or not a deal is reached by August 1st, Canada has already begun to decouple its industrial future from Trump's unpredictability and place it firmly in Canadian hands.